Welcome. My name is Abel Sanchez. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at filters. This is something that you'll use frequently. You'll often have large collections of information and arrays that you'll want to filter based on a specific criteria that you're going to specify. The language provides you this capability using a callback. So let's go ahead and take a look at some code. As you can see here, I have an array of employees, and within it we have 4 items. Each of those items is an object, and we have a couple of value pairs. We have the name and we have a salary. Now, in this case, we're going to write a filter that is going to select a number of these items based on the salary, and we'll write that criteria in a moment. Down here on line 18, you can see that we're making a call to the filter function. So you can see here employees.filter, and then we're specifying the callback. Now, callbacks for filters need to meet a specific criteria. They need to return a true or false value. If the item meets the condition of the callback, you keep that item in that new collection that has been filtered. If it does not meet the criteria, you return false. Now, you have the flexibility to write any criteria you want. You're writing the callback yourself. However, you must return true or false in order for the filter to do its job. So let's go ahead and write here a criteria for is big enough. We're going to be specifying what our criteria is for is big enough. In this case, I'm simply going to make a comparison, and anything that is over 500,000 I will keep. Anything that's not, I will disregard. And keeping here means returning true. Disregard means returning false. So let me go ahead and write a variable to hold the comparison value. And to this, I will assign the result of this comparison. So I'm going to make a comparison between salary and 500,000, as I mentioned before. Let's see if we have 3 zeros. Yes, we do. And after that, we're simply going to return the comparison. Now, after we apply this to each of these items, as you remember, whenever we're acting upon an array, the callback is applied to each of the items within that collection. Once we are applying that callback function to each of the items, we will have a filtered array. And you can see here that I've assigned that to a variable called filtered. And then I'm simply going to write it to the console for inspection. So let's go ahead and take a look at this within the browser. As you can see here, I have the page already loaded, filter.html. And if I reload the page, you can see there that I am filtering, and I'm only getting the values that are over 500,000. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this within the debugger, and let's go ahead and reload this page, simply to emphasize the point that it is applying this condition to every single item in the array. So as you can see here, this is the very first item that is being applied to. You can see it's the value of Peter, and Peter has a salary of 100,000. So the comparison will be false, as you can see here, and that's what will be returned. So this item will not be included. So I'm going to go on to the next element. And in this case, this salary, this person has a salary, let's go ahead and look at the element, of 425. That should also be false. And as you can see there, it is false. Let's go to the next one. In this case, the element, the person has a salary of 750,000, and this one is true, and so that one will be kept. And so if we go to the next one, this is the last one, this one will also be kept because it's over 500,000. So if we continue then and we look at the console, you can see there that those are the values that met that criteria. Now, simply to demonstrate what would happen if we change this value here, we should get the ones that are below. So if I go ahead and reload, and let me go ahead and remove the breakpoint. Now if we look at the console, you can see that those are the salaries under 500,000. So that's the bare bones example of filtering a group of data. an array of data. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is to filter information on zip codes. I want you to imagine that you are a fan of American graffiti and you're going to be visiting the city of Chicago, a city that has a lot of graffiti. And I've downloaded from the city of Chicago a public data set that has reports of all the graffiti that has appeared within this city. Now, you might also know that American cities are organized into zip codes. You can see here a lot of the zip codes within the city of Chicago, and if I click on one of these, I can get more information, the actual value, number of the zip code, and so on. And so there's a lot of these in the city of Chicago. Now, let me go ahead and go back to the code. And this file here has all of the reports that have been made about graffiti in the city for the month of July in 2005. I will also give you one for the full year, but that's quite a big file, so get started first with the small one so that you can debug it more easily. Now, this file can be a little bit overwhelming. It has a lot of information, and as you can see here, if we go all the way to the end, it has over 12,000 rows of information. Now, all of this information here is graffiti reports, and each of those graffiti reports is reporting on the zip code. So your job is going to be to move through all of this graffiti information, identify how many reports are being made for each of those zip codes, and you can do that using a filter. So let me go ahead and show you here the starter code that I've given you. I'm referencing Google Charts because at the end of this exercise we will display this information in a chart. I'm then giving you a collection of the zip codes. As you can see here, these are all the zip codes in the city of Chicago. Now, I've also given you the file that I mentioned. This is the graffiti reports for the month of July in 2015. And finally, I have some code there to graph all of this information. This part you don't need to concern yourself with. Now, at line 8, we simply make some space. We define a div that is going to hold that chart. And then let's get into the starter code here. We're defining a graffiti array to hold all of the information that we will collect. We're also defining another variable to hold the matches, and then finally one that is an object, and I will explain more about this in a minute. As you can see here, let me go ahead and go back to the file, and let me simply illustrate that all of that information, as you can see here from this file, is being assigned to a variable called Chicago. So if we enter Chicago, this is that file that I'm showing you. If we enter Chicago at the console, we'll immediately get back the top of the hierarchy of the information. As you can see there, you have meta and you also have data. So even if you knew nothing about this data set, which most of you will not, you can tell that most of the data will be inside of the data property. So if I enter that there, you can see that I get those 12,000 rows. And if I go further in and select a specific item, you can see there that I'm getting a specific graffiti report. Now, I'll leave it up to you to figure out what the zip code is. This is part of the fun when you do a data science exercise, is to be able to identify the information. All of that information is within that file. I'll give you another sample here. Let's go ahead and enter the 12th row, and you can start to compare and get a sense of what the information here is. So let's go ahead and go back to the file and go look at the starter code. As you can see here, we're dealing with two collections, two arrays. The first one is the number of zip codes that we know exist for the city. And so we're simply going to do a for each and then assign a callback. So for each of those zip codes, we're going to assign a callback, and the callback is graffiti reports. And that simply gives us a zip code that we're going to consider. We then use that zip code to filter through the information that we have within the Chicago array. So if you write your filter correctly here, you will be able to get back. This is very similar to the example we did before where we we're simply matching, in this case, for a salary. In this case, you will match for a specific zip. In this case, the zip that you're passing in, and you will get out of those 12,000s only the rows that match that zip. Now, once you get that filtered array, as you can see here, the array, it will be called matching. Then further down, you can get a count. And I'm going to ask you to create a new object that we will then push into the graffiti array that we've predefined on line 12. As you can see there, we create a new object, then we assign the zip. This is the zip that we're being passed in, the one that we're considering in this loop. And then finally, onto reports, we are simply going to assign the length. This is the number of rows that we found matching that zip code. So with this bit of code, you can get a count of all of the graffiti reports for every zip code in the city of Chicago. Now, the last two lines here at the bottom are simply to generate a data set, and these are codes that are being written behind the scenes. You don't need to understand how this works, but simply to know that if you construct your array here within this loop, then this last two lines will graph it onto the screen. And if you do everything correctly, this is what it looks like. You can see here a number of the reports. You can see that the reports of graffiti vary tremendously within the city. So if you were trying to find out which zip codes had the most graffiti and you enjoyed watching graffiti, you could make a good choice based on this information. So with that, let me wish you happy coding and goodbye.